Florida Senator Marco Rubio is with us now from Houston. Senator, good morning.
Good morning.
Did someone hit the panic button last night?
Well, I don't know what you're talking about. I can just tell you that a con artist is about to take over the Republican Party and the conservative movement, and we have to put a stop to it. And part of it is, look at the report you guys just did. Donald Trump last night had no answers on the issue of health care, and if you listen to that report that just led into this, the media is pumping him up as some sort of unstoppable force. Donald Trump has portrayed himself now consistently as fighting for the working people, and he has a record of sticking it to working people for 35 years. If any other candidate in this race had his record, there would be nonstop reporting on it. But unfortunately, he's being pumped up because many in the media with a bias know that he'll be easy to beat in a general election. So we're going to put a stop to it now. There is no way we are going to allow a con artist to take over the conservative movement, and Donald Trump is a con artist.
So what do you think a Trump government would look like, Senator?
It would be chaos.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to The Breathing Room, a space where people of color and faith can come together to have our lived experiences acknowledged, to witness each other's journey, and to take a collective deep breath. My name is Kevin Holland. This is episode 10, and the title is Don't Look Away, Say Something and Do Something. This is the next to last episode in this season, and I really appreciate you tracking with me from the beginning. Next week, I want to share what the Spirit has put on my heart to do to help more of us become anti-racists and more of our churches to become anti-racist and to become known for promoting racial justice. In this episode, we look at the assault on democracy and how race and white supremacy are interwoven in that struggle. I had to play that clip of Marco Rubio in 2016. It turns out he was a prophet because the serial liar and con artist has taken over the Republican Party and the quote conservative unquote movement. The few Republicans that insist that up is not down and down is not up and that this is all a lie get their heads cut off, like Liz Cheney and that Republican state senator from Michigan. And even now, Marco Rubio is a card-carrying, Kool-Aid drinking member of the MAGA cult. Talk about total conversion and radicalization. In this episode, I want to try to be one of the voices sounding the alarm that there is an authoritarian, autocratic, neo-fascist, white supremacist movement in our country led by the disgraced, twice impeached, former white supremacist in chief, and aided and abetted by elected Republican officials who do not have the courage of their convictions to stand against this individual who brought to the surface the dormant toxins of racial hatred and animus in the United States. In this episode, you'll hear 3 interviews and a statement of concern that I'm going to read that was submitted by 100 scholars of democracy to tell us this country is in trouble, where a third of the citizenry believes a toxic lie and a malignant conspiracy theory that years ago would have been denounced across the board. Listen to Reed Galen of the Lincoln Project, along with Lisa Senecal, Maya May, and Tedra Cobb discuss this.
And so if we don't hold them accountable, all we do is reinforce the premise that they've set forth, which is Donald Trump actually won the election.
I mean, Lisa, I think it's even more insidious than that. I think that they try and draw a parallel between the two because one of the things that is a main driver, frankly, of rage in the Republican Party, Maya, is the idea that millions of black votes appeared out of nowhere in Detroit and Philadelphia and Georgia and stole the election from Donald Trump, which we just know is not the case. But Republicans now are devoid of any sort of, well, certainly a moral compass, but even a political one at that.
It all comes back to race. You know, it's been an ugly thread in the Republican Party for a very, very long time. And now it is just full blown out in the open. January 6th was about trying to negate the votes of millions of black voters. And now that is being used as a justification for proposing more than 400 bills across 47 states in our country to disenfranchise black voters to make sure when the next election rolls around, they don't have to worry about black people showing up at the polls because they've made it impossible for them to vote. It is so incredibly anti-democratic And the idea that this is happening in our democracy is really astounding, but it is happening. I think we have this false sense of security in America. Like, we're a democracy. This kind of thing happens in other places, or this sort of thing ended with the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Movement. And no, this is us. This is what we're doing today. We are right back at it, and we really never stopped.
So what does this have to do with people of color and Christians of color and faith? We just need to be aware that a political party, hundreds of congressmen, tried to nullify the votes that many of us cast in swing states. What's interesting is there wasn't any question of or no auditing of any of the election results of any of the states that Trump won. And there wasn't a question of the validity of the vote count of Republicans who were on the same ticket as a presidential one. And so Biden's results were questioned, but those others on the ballot weren't, as long as Republicans won. And the level of denial is sickening, and it's going on right now. Efforts to disenfranchise you and those who look like you are happening right now. This isn't 1957. This isn't the Jim Crow South of the mid-20th century. This is 48 states in the summer of 2021. And it shows the utter disdain, disregard, and disrespect for the dignity and equality of people of color. I know many of us are still in shock because we thought that this era had ended. We thought that this battle had been won. You know how in those horror movies when the villain is killed and then the hero walks away only to be surprise attacked again by the villain or monster that rises from the dead? That's what we're seeing in 2021. White supremacy, white grievance, white male privilege in one of its many expressions, disenfranchising black voters, changing the rules, moving the goalposts, gaslighting all of America, denying everything, aided and abetted by silent Republicans and other citizens of goodwill who insist on looking the other way, let alone Christians who are content to see no evil, speak no evil, hear no evil. Listen to former Republican Nicole Wallace interview John Heilman and listen to him lay out the utter sickening hypocrisy, cynicism, and disrespect for the intelligence and agency of the U.S. citizenry.
And later, when Trump does take the stage,
we're going to walk down to the Capitol.
Some hear his words as a call to action.
You'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong.
Capitol building.
Do the right thing.
Take the Capitol.
But these rioters believe they've been deputized by their president to stop a crime.
Yeah, I mean, and John Hammond, like there is no long game anymore, right? I mean, to your point, we're at the fork in the road. And we're either going to be a country that investigates attacks on the United States Capitol, deadly attacks incited by an ex-president, or not. We're either going to be a country where everyone can vote, or 480 or 389 voter suppression laws who change the arbiters of the count are going to pass. I mean, to your point, like, there isn't a long game to be played right now. Everything seems very much up in the air.
I mean, I don't think anybody's sensible, and, you know, Tim can speak to this with more inside knowledge than I have, but I don't think anybody sensible thinks that if you're a Republican right now, that you think, well, you know, there used to be all that talk about how if Trump lost, we'd have a civil war in the Republican Party and the establishment Republicans would take on the Trumpists. And we all have seen what's happened here, right? That turned out to be utterly illusory. There is no long game that's in our imagination, a length of time that's meaningful for us who live here at a normal human lifespan, where it's like you can see, well, there might be a time when what we used to think of as normalcy in the Republican Party comes back. The Republican Party is totally captive to this Trumpist cult now. And so you'd have to be mentally ill to think, well, a couple cycles from now, if I play my cards right, this will do me good politically. That's not, Tim is 1,000% right about that. This is a suicide mission for Liz Cheney, given the way the current Republican Party is constituted. And I'll tell you how I know that, Nicole. I know that because as horrifying and deleterious and disgusting as the big lie is, the big lie about election fraud that Republicans have rallied around and decided that they're all going to either explicitly or implicitly support. The craziest thing, and this is the thing that's been making me more incensed than anything else, you know, you and I looking at that New York Times video, right? What's the thing that makes you, there are many things that make you very upset. There are things that make me that make me almost physically ill, again, having been up there that day and been, hearing flashbangs go off like 10 feet from me as I was up there trying to cover it. It's like there's a little PTSD in it. But the worst part of it is the setup for it, where they walk through and say and show you the degree of denial about Republicans who haven't just bought in on the big lie about the election was stolen, now are building another big lie on top of that big lie. And that bigger big lie is the memory holing of this event, which is this was not that bad. They were just tourists. They were all patriots. That is not everybody in the Republican Party, but explicitly it's way too many of them. And implicitly it's now Kevin McCarthy. Because unless you are really down for finding out what happened on January 6th, you are implicitly then on the side of the memory holders. And as bad as the big lie is, this is the lie that says we're going to, with video out there, with all of the evidence available, with this New York Times thing on the web, and a dead police officer and 100 injured police officers, we're going to stand up in front of you on television and say, it didn't actually happen. Don't believe your eyes. It wasn't really an insurrection. They were all patriots. It was all day at the beach. That is the explicit, for some, an implicit for many message of the Republican Party right now. And that is the ultimate lesson for Liz Cheney. If your party is there, being on the committee is political suicide. And again, it points to why I think the stakes for finding out what actually happened here are as important as they are.
I want to read a statement of concern. And as I read it, I want you to think about this question. Have you ever before 2020 and 2021 in your life heard anyone talk about the fact that democracy was in peril in the United States? That we live in the era and time of the greatest threat to democracy since the Civil War. And of course, people dismiss it and say we're exaggerating and we're alarmist. And yet when you look at what we have seen happen in the past 6 to 8 months, by the way, have ever before in your lifetime, have you ever seen a president that lost an election be such a coward and small person that they would not show up to an inauguration of their successor and deny that they won and then walk away like nothing's wrong? Thought experiment again. Imagine if President Barack Hussein Obama had done that. The level of outrage from his opponents would have registered on the Richter scale. Again, the hypocrisy is sickening. But I want you to listen to this statement of concern that is not made by people that are easily rattled, that are uninformed, that haven't been through battles, and that don't know a threat to democracy when they see one. From New America, Statement of Concern, the threats to American democracy and the need for national voting and election administration standards. We, the undersigned, are scholars of democracy who have watched the recent deterioration of U.S. elections and liberal democracy with growing alarm. Specifically, we have watched with deep concern as Republican-led state legislatures across the country have in recent months proposed or implemented what we consider radical changes to core electoral procedures in response to unproven and intentionally destructive allegations of a stolen election. Collectively, these initiatives are transforming several states into political systems that no longer meet the minimum conditions for free and fair elections. Hence, our entire democracy is now at risk. When democracy breaks down, it typically takes many years, often decades, to reverse the downward spiral. In the process, violence and corruption typically flourish, and talent and wealth flee to more stable countries, undermining national prosperity. It is not just our venerated institutions and norms that are at risk. It is our future national standing, strength, and ability to compete globally. Statutory changes in large key electoral battleground states are dangerously politicizing the process of electoral administration, with Republican-controlled legislatures giving themselves the power to override electoral outcomes on unproven allegations should Democrats win more votes. They are seeking to restrict access to the ballot, the most basic principle underlying the right of all adult American citizens to participate in our democracy. They are also putting in place criminal sentences and fines meant to intimidate and scare away poll workers and nonpartisan administrators. State legislatures have advanced initiatives that curtail voting methods now preferred by Democratic-leaning constituencies, such as early voting and mail voting. Republican lawmakers have openly talked about ensuring the purity and quality of the vote, echoing arguments widely used across the Jim Crow South as reasons for restricting the black vote. State legislatures supporting these changes have cited the urgency of electoral integrity and need to ensure that elections are secure and free of fraud. But by multiple expert judgments, the 2020 election was extremely secure and free of fraud. The reason that Republican voters have concerns is because many Republican officials, led by former President Donald Trump, have manufactured false claims of fraud, claims that have been repeatedly rejected by courts of law and which Trump's own lawyers have acknowledged were mere speculation when they testified about them before judges. In future elections, these laws politicizing the administration and certification of elections could enable some state legislatures or partisan election officials to do what they failed to do in 2020, reverse the outcome of a free and fair election. Further, these laws could entrench extended minority rule, violating the basic and long-standing democratic principle that parties that get the most votes should win elections. Democracy rests on certain elemental institutional and normative conditions. Elections must be neutrally and fairly administered. They must be free of manipulation. Every citizen who is qualified must have an equal right to vote, unhindered by obstruction. And when they lose elections, political parties and their candidates and supporters must be willing to accept defeat and acknowledge the legitimacy of the outcome. The refusal of prominent Republicans to accept the outcome of the 2020 election and the anti-democratic laws adopted or approaching adoption in Arizona, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Iowa, Montana, and Texas, and under serious consideration in other Republican-controlled states, violate these principles. More profoundly, these actions call into question whether the United States will remain a democracy. As scholars of democracy, we condemn these actions in the strongest possible terms as a betrayal of our precious democratic heritage. The most effective remedy of these anti-democratic laws at the state level is federal action to protect equal access of all citizens to the ballot and to guarantee free and fair elections. Just as it ultimately took federal voting rights laws to put an end to state-led voter suppression laws throughout the South, federal law must once again ensure that American citizens' voting rights do not depend on which party or faction happens to be dominant in their state legislature, and that votes are cast and counted equally, regardless of the state or jurisdiction in which a citizen happens to live. This is widely recognized as a fundamental principle of electoral integrity in democracies around the world. A new voting rights law, such as that proposed in the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, is essential, but alone is not enough. True electoral integrity demands a comprehensive set of national standards that ensure the sanctity and independence of election administration, guarantee that all voters can freely exercise their right to vote, prevent partisan gerrymandering from giving dominant parties in the states an unfair advantage in the process of drawing congressional districts, and regulate ethics and money in politics. It is always far better for major democracy reforms to be bipartisan to give change the broadest possible legitimacy. However, in the current hyperpolarized political context, such broad bipartisan support is sadly lacking. Elected Republican leaders have had numerous opportunities to repudiate Trump and his Stop the Steal crusade, which led to the violent attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. Each time, they have sidestepped the truth and enabled the lie to spread. We urge members of Congress to do whatever is necessary, including suspending the filibuster, in order to pass national voting and election administration standards that both guarantee the vote to all Americans equally and prevent state legislatures from manipulating the rules in order to manufacture the result they want. Our democracy is fundamentally at stake. History will judge what we do at this moment. Signed by over 100 scholars of democracy, June 1st, 2021. Over 100 scholars are alarmed at what they see. We should be alarmed too, because what we've seen in the past 6 to 8 months, none of us have ever seen in our lifetimes. Listen to Steve Schmidt, a 30-year Republican who recently left the party and co-founded the Lincoln Project, lay out in stark terms what we're dealing with.
We have hundreds of pieces of legislation in the country that have been filed aimed at restricting voting rights, right? And let's put it through a test, right? Let's apply 3 questions to it. Number 1, would any of that legislation have been filed if Donald Trump had won the election? And the answer to that question is no, none of that legislation would have been filed if Donald Trump was the winner of the election. Question 2, is all of that legislation based on the premise of the big lie that Donald Trump won the election, but it was stolen from him by black votes that were illegitimate that appeared from the ether in the wards of America's inner cities? And the answer to that question is yes. It's yes. All of the legislation is derivative of that big lie? And number three, does the legislation make it harder for black people to vote, for brown people to vote? And it does. And so when you think about this and you think about the history of the country and the history of the state of West Virginia, there is a West Virginia because West Virginia was loyal to the Union. It seceded from Virginia at the Civil War, and it was anti-slavery. When you look out across the history of the country, black people substantially, with real federal legislation with teeth in it, got the right to vote in America in 1965. And in the aftermath of this election, and on the foundation of the immorality of the big lie, and it is an immoral lie, we see this great effort to take back those voting rights. And so the question is around two issues. What's more important, defense of the Constitution, and are you prepared to strike down a Senate rule that is being used to assault faith and belief in American democracy? The first question is around the 1-6 Commission. If we don't have a commission by the Congress that holds to account everybody who is tangentially involved in an attack on the Congress, you get another generation of political violence in this country. And if you don't strike down the rule, you get hundreds of pieces of legislation that start to form a new 21st century discriminatory framework that will be different from Jim Crow, but will extend yet into another American century, the injustice that has followed black Americans since their arrival on the continent by force.
I really don't want to be so dire and dour, but what I don't want more than that is to be another generation of Christians and churches that are asleep at the wheel and that do not have the courage and conviction and Christ-likeness to speak out against injustice, speak up for the disenfranchised and the oppressed, and to fight for justice. And God helping us, we will not be that church. We will not be those Christians. Learn to do what is right, promote justice, give the oppressed reason to celebrate, take up the cause of the orphan, defend the rights of the widow. Isaiah 1:17, New English Translation. Thanks again for spending some time in the Breathing Room, a space where people of color and faith can come together to have our lived experiences acknowledged, to witness each other's journey, and to take a collective deep breath. Be sure to subscribe to The Breathing Room on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, or however you listen. And if you like this episode, don't forget to leave a rating and a review. To connect with us, follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, or send us an email at thebreathingroompod@gmail.com. For The Breathing Room, I'm Kevin Holland, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.